Tony, thank you for that presentation. Very thorough. I love hearing the insights from that Leadership Council and MarTech. Again, let me in someday. I have to listen to what those folks are saying because it's so relevant and so timely. The challenges they go through in marketing operations, and now you're throwing in things like data operations, IT operations. Everything has to be kind of intertwined today. I thought your first point about art versus science, was a real interesting one, and you're actually seeing the art taking over. I mean, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I think it's been that way for some time. A lot of marketing operations structures are the imprints of a particularly strong leader. And so they often shape the organization. The business model and the product offerings and the regional footprint also shape this. There's also, frankly, just how mature the organization is and how much of a degree of investment. And so you end up with if you try to analyze this, it's more like a, Jackson Pollitt kind of sprayed on, this organization's doing things very, very differently from a marketing ops than this other, organization, even sometimes in the same industry. And so as an analyst, I would like to see things more, as more like kind of still abstract expressionist, but clear blocks of color, here and there so that we can draw conclusions. And I think we can at some level. I think, we've just seen that, but we have to be cautious about the lessons that we draw because they can still be very contextual. So anyone who tells you there's a universal way of doing this, you ought to just, maybe be a little bit suspect.
Yeah, as you were talking through the presentation, I was thinking about one time when you aired some thoughts on MarTech and marketing technology leadership and stack management. And I think, if I'm correct, Tony, did you compare it to like walking through a mall? Remember that one you came up with? I thought that was pretty cool. I would love for you to share that with our listeners because it helped me kind of process, like, all right, what are the big challenges here? Is there one centerpiece, like, center of truth for a marketing stack? And I think your contention was no. It's more like the mall, right? Where there's a bunch of people in the middle. There's a kiosk guy, and food court.
That's right. So as an analyst firm, we try to build reference models for people. So these are kind of generic ways of looking at the world that then they can adapt to their circumstance. And you use, different metaphors to help people describe their current situation and some aspirational future state, right? And so we came out and still use very heavily, and you saw it in the past presentation, this kind of layer cake stack diagrams that a lot of people use, and it's one way of explaining the world. The problem with that approach is it doesn't really always talk about weight or emphasis. And so my colleagues came up with this notion that maybe we could put the stack on its side and look at it like a mall diagram. And at first, honestly, Dom, I hated that. It's like, aren't malls dying? I mean, this is too trite. We put it in front of our council and they loved it. They're like, yeah, this is totally how. And the notion is that you have anchor tenants in your mall and you have boutiques. And so the anchor tenants are the 4 or 5 platforms that are really central. They go dark and you've got big problems. The boutiques are some of the smaller things you might be doing around it, like A/B testing or those sorts of things where they're really useful and creative. And you can experiment. If your relationship with the vendor goes bad and you have to swap in another one, it's not the end of the world. Whereas your anchors are really important. You probably want to have dedicated in-house staff for those. You probably want to pay attention to that vendor relationship. It may be more of a platform as a service rather than software as a service. There's because of the customizations you may need to do. It's a way of, some people talk about 2-track IT, one faster, one necessarily slower. This is, in a sense, another way of looking at this is kind of 2-track MarTech, that some boxes in your some tenants in your mall are just more important than others.
Yeah, just as long as they don't spray perfume or cologne at you as you're walking by in the middle of the mall when you're trying to eat a pretzel.
Let me tell you something. If you're working with Adobe, Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle, others, then they're spraying perfume at you 24/7.
Well, it's true. I mean, you mentioned some of the the big the big platforms that you need dedicated staff to be on. I mean, we've had experience too where, like, I want to change a little. Don't change that; it's going to blow up the whole. So you're locked into these massive platforms sometimes, and you do need that dedicated person to be on top of that tool, if something just to be on top of it.
Yeah, and these are where you need product managers because, you're constantly going to be reshuffling, if it's a department store, the men's department, the children's department, what are you going to have there? You need someone on your team really in charge of what that anchor store is looking like. And so, again, this kind of reiterates the whole importance of the product management paradigm as a way of managing your anchors, maybe less important for your sort of boutique parts of your mall.
Yeah. And Tony, in your prezzo, you talked about AI and ML. I mean, you cannot have a MarTech presentation without it.
Yeah.
What's the big impact there on a marketing operations team? Is it new skills that need to be trained, new capabilities, new hires, new data scientists brought into the MarTech team, or are some of these vendors in that are helping with AI, ML in marketing processes actually making it easier on the teams to pull out these campaigns to manage their MarTech stacks?
Yeah. So it's always good to bring in, people with newer skills. If you can get data scientists who are dedicated to your marketing operations, that's always great. I'm a bit of a contrarian and a crank when it comes to AI and ML, in that I'm not sure that marketing teams have the savvy and skilled to manage it effectively across a lot of different products, and that this should be an enterprise concern, and it should be an enterprise concern because it addresses a lot of sensitive issues around your ability to audit and understand what's in that machine. We've seen out there in the world where ML programs can discriminate against people of color, against women. It can cause all kinds of issues out there, and so this is something you're playing with, something semi-atomic here, and it's not honestly, if you care about your brand and you care about your customers, in our opinion, you ought to approach it with some caution and not just. And by the way, a lot of the stuff that the vendors call AI and ML is just bullshit. I mean, it's just some algorithm, and they're really being pushed by analysts and others and investors to say that they do it as opposed to them really doing it. So our byword here is really caution and cooperating with your enterprise peers who just know how the hell all this stuff actually works.
So how do you know how to call out the BS, Tony? Like, what do you do as a team if you're looking to implement a tool and you're getting this fascinating pitch from a vendor?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm here on the road helping a very large global organization select a CDP. We've had week-long demos. And one of the things we do is we just kind of deprecate it in our selection process. We don't make it a requirement. Of course, the vendors want to blab on about it, but if I think it's less a question of talking to vendors and more a question of talking to your peers in your organization. How are we going to address this really complicated, potentially useful, but really complicated and fraught technology? How are we going to do it in an ethical and effective way?
All right, well, let's wrap this up with a fill in the blank, shall we, Tony? 2023, the best marketing operations teams will do this. What is it?
They'll get their customer data house in order. That might be 2024 too, but I think, without really unified, effective, high quality, accessible customer data, everything else just grinds and grinds and grinds.
Will they get that done with a fabulous tool, or is it more processes and management?
It's more processes and management.
Okay. All right, you heard it here first. Tony Byrne, founder and CEO of Real Story Group, with his presentation on marketing operations and follow-up Q&A. We thank you so much for your time, Tony, and we wish you, as a Green Bay Packers fan, nothing but success in the fall of 2022.
I'm not holding my breath, but thanks, Tom. It's always great to see you, and many thanks to the CMSWire.com team and all the great folks you have putting together this DX Summit. It's always a highlight on my calendar.
Sweet. Having you as a highlight, too. Thank you, Tony. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
All right, back to you guys.